Hey everyone, so today we're going to be learning about Python for loops. And I'm currently on replit.com. I'm going to create a Python replit and we're going to name it for loops. And while that is loading, a for loop is the other primitive loop in Python. And it's used for iterating over a sequence, and that sequence can be a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set, or even a string. This is less like the for keyword in other programming languages, and it works more like an iterator method as found in other object-oriented programming languages. So with the for loop, we can execute a set of statements, once for each item in a list, tuple, set, dictionary, or string. So for example, let's say we had a list called fruits, and in that list we had the strings apple, banana, and cherry. Now, if we wanted to print each fruit in the fruit list, we're going to have to write the following code. For x in fruits, print x. And what this is going to do is the for loop is going to iterate through this whole list. So it's going to go from apple to cherry. And it's going to print everything in this list. So if we run the code, we're going to see we get apple, banana, and cherry all on different lines. And it's slightly different from the while loop in that the for loop doesn't require an indexing variable. So if you remember from while loops, we had an indexing variable called I most of the time, but it can also be called other things. But for the for loop, it doesn't require it. The next thing we're going to be learning about for Python for loops is looping through a string. And strings are iterable objects because they contain a sequence of characters. So for example, if we wanted to loop through a string called banana, we can loop through each character in this string and print them all on separate lines. So the for loop is going to iterate through the first character all the way until the last character of the string. So if we run this, we're going to get banana, except each character is going to be printed on different lines. Next, we are going to be learning about the break statement. And the break statement for loops is basically the same thing as the break statement for while loops. It's going to serve the same function. So with the break statement, we can stop the loop before it has looped through all the items. So if we wanted to exit the loop when x is banana, then we would have to add this. And what this is going to do is when x is equal to banana, let's actually go back to the fruits example. So fruits, so if we're going through a list and we want to stop when we reach the word or the string banana, we're going to have to add this. And when x is equal to banana, it's just going to break from the for loop and it's going to stop the for loop completely. So it's not going to print anything after it prints banana. So it's not going to print cherry. And we can actually change the output of this when we change the order of our code. So if we run this one, then we're gonna only get apple. And the reason why is because print is actually after the break statement. And what happens is when x is equal to apple, we're just gonna print apple because x is not equal to banana yet. However, for the next iteration, when x is equal to banana, it's gonna reach this and it's gonna reach the break statement. So it's not gonna be able to print the banana string. And consequently, it's not gonna be able to print the cherry string as well. So the order of these actually influences the output of the code. Next, we're going to be learning about the continue statement, and this is also basically the same thing as the continue statement in while loops. So with the continue statement, we can stop the current iteration of the loop and continue with the next. So it's only going to stop the iteration that it's currently on, and it's going to move on and continue with the subsequent iterations. So for example, let's say we changed break to continue. What's going to happen is it's only going to skip banana. And that's because when x is equal to banana, we're going to reach the continue statement, and that's going to skip whatever's underneath it, and it's going to continue on to x equals cherry, and it's going to print that. So if we run the code, we're going to get apple and cherry. Next, we're going to learn about the range function. And what the range function does is it's going to allow us to loop through a set of code a specific number of times. And we can use the range function in for loops. So the range function returns a sequence of numbers starting from 0 to whatever specified number. So for example, if we got rid of that and said range 6, and then we're actually going to print the numbers 0 through 5. And it's important to note that range 6 is actually going to give you only numbers 0 through 5 and not 0 through 6. This is very important. This is where many people get confused, or they forget that when you put 6, it only goes until 5. So that's important to remember. And it's also important to remember that it starts from 0. But using the range function, we can also specify the range. But before we get into that, let's just run this code. And as you can see, we print the numbers 0 through 5 on different lines. And as I said before, we can actually specify the range of numbers that we specifically want. However, similarly, for this one, we're only going to get numbers 2 through 5. And that's because, like before, we're not going to actually get the last number. So let's try running the code. And as you can see, we go from 2 through 5. The range function can also increment the sequence by 1, but it can also you can also specify the increment value by adding a third parameter in the function. So let's say we wanted to go from 2 to 30, but we want to increment by 3. Then what's going to happen is we're going to get all the numbers from 2 to 29, except we're going to increment by 3. So we're going to get 5, 8, 11, and so on until we reach the last number. Okay, so let's print or run the code. And as you can see, we don't print the numbers 3, 4, or 6 and 7, or all the numbers in between. We only want numbers that increment by 3, from 2 to 29. And the next thing we're going to learn about in Python for loops is the else statement. What the else keyword in a for loop does, it's going to execute a block of code when the for loop is finished. So for example, if we go back to a simpler example and we add in the else block and print finally finished, then once the for loop has iterated through the range of numbers 0 through 5, we're going to actually print finally finished. So let's run the code. And as you can see, we print the numbers 0 through 5, and at the end, we print finally finished. And that's only when we get through the numbers 0 through 5. So for example, if we did a break statement in between this sequence of numbers, then we're actually not going to print this, because we stopped in the middle and we weren't able to get to the number 5. So it's not going to reach the else block, and it's not going to print finally finished. The second to last thing that we're going to learn about Python for loops is nested loops. And to simply explain what a nested loop is, it's basically a loop inside a loop. So to actually show you, let's say we had a list called adjective equals red, big, and tasty. And we had another list called fruits equals apple, banana, and cherry. Okay, and let's say for the outer loop, we loop through the adjective list, and for the inner loop, we iterate through the fruits list. And we're going to print each element in adjective and fruits. And so if we run this code, what's basically going to happen is the inner loop here is going to be executed one time for each iteration of the outer loop. So let's say x starts from red, right? When x is equal to red, we're going to go through the whole for loop for this. So it's going to print red apple, red banana, red cherry, and then next, when x is equal to big, it's going to go through this inner loop again. So it's going to be big apple, big banana, big cherry, and then so on. So let's run the code. And as you can see, we get all the different combinations here. The last thing we're going to learn about for Python for loops is the pass statement. The for loops cannot be empty, but if for some reason you had to leave one empty, in order to avoid an error, you would actually have to write pass. But otherwise, you would usually want to add something in the for loop. But you never know. Sometimes you might want to leave it blank. And in that case, if you leave it blank, you're actually going to get an error, as you can see here. So in order to avoid that error, you're going to have to include the pass statement. Okay? And that's going to be it for Python for loops. And thank you for listening.